that you can do these things to make sure that you are still in the room. Because the one thing I don't want to happen for our neurodiverse folks who are extremely talented is for you to be fully in the room.
Yeah.
Imagine only a quarter of you isolated in a room showing up. No, I want the whole you in high definition being in the room.
Hey, it's Joy, and this is the Joy of Neurodiversity podcast. Here we break down stereotypes, celebrate the brilliance of different minds, and get real about what it actually means to be neurodivergent. Because at the heart of it all, neurodiversity isn't just a concept, it's people. It's lived experiences, challenges, strengths, and the stories that connect us. Whether you're here to learn, feel seen, or reimagine what's possible, you're in the right place. By pressing play, you're choosing to embrace a new way of thinking, one that honors every brain for what it brings. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's dive into today's episode. Hello, and welcome to the Joy of Neurodiversity podcast. I am your host, Joy Buckner. Today, I'm joined by Dane Ray, a dedicated affirming therapist and advocate with over 2 decades of experience in education, prevention, and public health care. Based in Washington, D.C., Dane is a licensed clinical professional counselor serving Maryland and has worked extensively within and on behalf of the LGBTQIA communities. With a background in research and public health communication, Dane is committed to bridging gaps in the healthcare system, ensuring the equitable care that we all deserve. In this episode, we'll dive into Dane's journey navigating life as a neurodiverse mind with ADD, ASD, and visual perception deficiency, along with the systematic challenges that led to founding DNA Consulting Services, Dane's company. Get ready for an insightful conversation on advocacy, accessibility, and the intersection of neurodiversity and gender identity. Dane, I hope you're ready to get started because I am so excited to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for this platform to elevate the voices of folks who are neurodiverse, folks who are navigating life and its nuance with multiple intersections. So we really appreciate the platform. It feels so timely and relevant to have these voices elevated, to include my own now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I think I probably have told you this, but I am just so grateful for everyone who has been willing to come on and share their story. I think that we are going to really impact some lives with this. And I'm hoping, just the whole reason why I started the podcast is because I realized there's just so many misconceptions about neurodiversity. And I think the best way to combat that is for people to just hear stories and see themselves in others. And so what other way than to have just meaningful conversations with people and take them on your journey? I know that your journey has been multifaceted, and I just know that this conversation is going to be so impactful. So again, I'm so grateful for your being here. Can we start by just having you introduce yourself? I know you're like, this is going to be a loaded question, Joy, but tell us a little bit about your journey, who you are, what you do, and what brought you into this work.
Yeah. So, I think some of my earliest experiences that formulated my self-concept, my self-image, were moments where I was like perceived. So
Yeah.
when I was young, I was really involved with the church. When I was young, I also like auditioned for some TV television shows. And so like the
Okay.
auditioning process, like being perceived, having to learn lines, people watching, listening to me, and also being diagnosed with ADHD and visual perception deficiency at the age of 4. And this was in the 80s, really shaped how I saw myself in the world, how I navigated strengths and differences. So the words that I would use to describe myself, someone that is someone who is artistic, someone who is creative, someone who has some pretty proficient verbal capacity at a young age, someone who has I mean, I would qualify myself as like a highly sensitive person. That would be
Okay.
another thing that I would describe myself as. I'm a parent. Um, I definitely see myself as a healer and a helper.
Yeah.
So those are some of the ways I see myself: artist, healer, helper, and someone who has navigated life with a lot of different levels of perception, with how the world perceives me and how I navigate it. Those are kind of my earlier experiences.
And where in the world, I know this, I feel like you've grown up all over, but where in the world are you from? Uh and
So I
kind of
grew
tell
up
us a little bit about
right
your
outside of
background.
Philadelphia, and and that was at the time where I received the diagnosis from ADHD with ADHD. And so I was in the Philadelphia, right outside the Philadelphia area until maybe the early 90s. And
Mhm.
that's when I moved to Atlanta, Georgia. So moving from either the Northeast or the Mid Atlantic, depending on who's debating where Philadelphia is. But moving from like the Mid Atlantic area or the Northeast to the South was a cultural, spiritual change. And
Yeah.
so moved to Atlanta, and I moved to Atlanta before the Olympics. And so
Okay.
I moved to Atlanta where Atlanta was still like a tertiary type of a city.
Mm,
People knew it. It wasn't necessarily a tiny city, but it was not the mecca, quote unquote, that it is today.
okay.
So I was in Atlanta until the age of 27 after I finished my undergrad degree. And at the age of 27, I landed where I am now, which is in Washington, D.C. So I've been in
Mm,
Washington, D.C. since the age of 27 years old.
okay. I listen, I've known Dane and Dane's wife Anna for a while. Anna and I marathoned together. And so every single time you say Washington, D.C., I mean, I'm based in Dubai, but every time you say Washington, D.C., I just get a little ping. I miss that city so much. And when I go back, I'm like, oh goodness, why did I leave this place? But so I'm living a little bit vicariously through you. When you say visual perception deficient, can you tell me a little bit more about what that is? And I know that you have ADD, you have ADHD without the hyperactivity, so just
Yeah.
attention deficit. And
Mhm.
then what is the visual perception um,
Yeah, so I'd like
deficiency?
to actually just name the three things and walk
Yeah.
through the three things if that feels helpful.
Oh, that would
So,
feel very helpful.
yeah, like I navigate attention deficit without hyperactivity. I also navigate autism, and some people might qualify me as high functioning
Mm,
on the spectrum. And because it's a spectrum, it doesn't really matter where you find yourself. And
yeah.
so I'll talk a little bit about that, and then the visual perception deficiency. So ADHD without hyperactivity to me is when your brain has the capacity, which is a strength,
Mm-hmm.
to manage a lot of thoughts.
Okay.
So think about, you've got a mouth that can detach, and you are drinking from the fire hose. And
Mm-hmm.
so, someone who has ADHD without hyperactivity is someone whose brain is processing a lot. So imagine like a dozen TV channels playing at the same time.
Yeah.
How much of the different TV channels do you think you can absorb? But if you only have one remote for all those different channels.
Yes. Not many.
Mhm. So
It's
instead
very
of
different.
like being wiggly or super active, the things that someone with ADHD without hyperactivity, they might forget things a lot
Mm,
because their attention is attached to one thing, but then there's the other channel that's also going on at the same time. So that
okay.
really prevents the the cognitive piece, the neurological piece of like following through on what that thought is,
Mm,
because of how the brain is wired, not necessarily because of anything someone's doing wrong. And I think that
yes.
there's like a moral conflation of ADHD of like, oh, you're distractible, so that's like a moralistic, problematic behavior that we have to correct. When really it's based off of how your brain is wired, so you can understand that someone might forget or move from one thing to the next. That's just how the brain is wired.
Yes.
Also, the depth of someone with ADHD might get lost in their thoughts. So they do a lot of processing. There's a little bit
Mm,
of a deep dive. So instead of taking one or two shovels out of the sand, we are going to go as deep as we can with that particular thought. So the daydreaming is something that is very common. Daydreaming. Now, in a pathological sense, I have to like name the kind of clinical presentation. It can also be like dissociation. Like it
Yeah.
can be on that variance of like it being daydreaming, having a thought, getting lost in the thought, but it can be presented as to the extreme of like dissociation. And so managing that, the breadth of that presentation can be challenging. Also, just having a hard time starting or finishing tasks. There is definitely a qualifier of like novelty.
Mm,
Like you can do a hard thing because it's hard, but as soon as you figured out how to do it, you actually don't even need to do it because you've already figured out how to do it. So
exactly.
finishing tasks can be difficult because of interest,
Yes.
because of the novelty. So even if you really want to do something, if you kind of already like seen the end of the light, it can be difficult to like follow it through to the end.
Dane,
And
you
just
are explaining my mind.
oh wow, also the feeling of overwhelm, and so there can be a conflation of like anxiolytic or anxiety symptoms of
Mm,
overwhelm that someone might see, and this could be sensory, but it also could be neurological. Like you're asking someone to tie their shoes, but you're also telling them to hurry up, but you're also telling them, did you remember this? Overwhelm.
yes.
Too many instructions at once, and this often comes up, especially with younger folks, around testing. You have to be
Yes.
quiet, not move, not ask for help, but get this right. Overwhelm.
Complete overwhelm. And I
These are
love that
characteristics that
you're,
I had to, yeah.
I'm sorry, I love that you're really breaking down what this could look like. And I'm not saying that this is what it looks like for every person, but what it could look like. Because so often in this world, people hear ADHD and they just think that the person is going to be bouncing off the walls and able to sit still. And in so many cases, that's not what it looks like at all. So I love that
Mhm.
you're really taking us through and saying, this is what it looks like for me, but giving people a practical, just what it could look like in some people to,
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that.
and
But please,
something I've heard, a question I've also gotten is like, well, how would somebody notice this? Like, how do you notice someone who is just being a kid and sort of fidgety versus someone who actually may have some symptoms that are close to, or some symptoms that you might want to look into or pay attention to?
mm,
Somebody who zones out or doesn't always respond quickly. So for me, I have an aversion, of like a clinical aversion to text messages.
okay.
And so I may not respond in the moment or within the time frame that some people are expecting. And it's
mm,
because of the overwhelm. What am I supposed to say? What do I need to say? What has to be said? And uh, if I say it, what happens after that? So there's a lot of energy that goes into the output of someone who has ADHD doing something, closing the loop, closing the tab.
okay.
And that's part of the reason why. So you might see like a younger person like forgetting their homework, forgetting their keys, forgetting their license, is because they're trying so hard to manage one or two things that the other things go to the wayside. Because you can only allocate resources so much
Yes.
physiologically. Uh, Also, I don't want to. There's also a conflation of intellect and ability.
Yes.
And a lot of times, folks with ADHD, they can understand things, but their articulation or the way that they are able to present that
Mm,
information takes longer or different. So, a lot of my accommodations growing up, even up to college, was being able to have ways to articulate my knowledge that weren't standardized.
yes.
So if I, because of visual perception deficiency, I'll talk about that next.
Okay.
And that basically, visual perception deficiency really means that you see the world differently. It's not bad eyesight. And if I had to like give a layman's term example, I'd say it's like a third cousin removed from like a dyslexia. So it's not necessarily always just mixing up letters, even though it can be.
Okay.
It's more so not the mixing up. It is the your brain's difficulty or difference with being able to make distinction. So the way
Mm,
that showed up for me in the most pervasive way was formulas and math.
okay.
I could get the numbers and put the numbers where they were supposed to be, but when it came to like making sure I balanced that equation with a negative sign, you could forget it, and it always
Yeah.
ended up being wrong. just because of that
Mhm.
small difference, not carrying this over, not keeping the equation balanced. So for me, mixing up some of those different types of equations where was something that's difficult, or like following like PEMDAS, like keeping it in that order and making sure I
Yeah,
did multiplication after the parentheses. If I didn't, it would make the whole equation wrong. This is very, very common for somebody with visual perception deficiency.
absolutely.
Another
I
example.
struggle with I mean, I'm dyslexic and I have Erlangen syndrome. I'm pretty sure I probably have dyscalculia, but it was just never really addressed. I just always
Mhm.
assumed I was bad at math. But it's what you're saying, this little the to me, little things that I oversee that end up being the reason why I can't solve is what I just don't see in my mind.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Another common thing is like copying notes. So like if you're on, I mean, thank God for AI.
I know.
I say that with like ethical intention, like using AI is great, and also you want to make sure you don't take away your own agency with using
Yeah.
AI. If that would existed in the 80s, it would have been a totally different game changer for me, because one of the things with visual perception deficiency is copying the notes that are provided. It was hard for
Mhm.
me because I automatically wanted to provide like cliff notes. I wanted to
Yes.
paraphrase, and I would lose the essence because the ADHD was present, which focused on novelty. So I tried to capture what I thought was important, but I'd
Yes.
lose some of the things that were essential. So
Mhm.
somebody who has perception deficiency might struggle to like copy notes or what is said verbally, because the words might jump or they might blur. So even though the words are clearly written, by the time I get to the second line, it is very much giving wah 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 wah. And so I
Yes.
just basically remix it. That's what happens.
Mhm.
I just
Mhm.
remix it. I'm like, okay, this is basically the essence of versus verbatim. So it's a very different experience for somebody with visual perception deficiency. And then they'll say, you're behind, you're delayed because
Yes.
you aren't capturing what's real. Uh, a person trouble finding things. So a messy drawer can lead to
Mm.
dysregulation. It can lead to sensory overwhelm, and it can lead to a sense of a diminished self-concept. Because if you have your room, your space, and you can't access something, that has a big, big impact on someone's emotional affect and
Yes.
also someone's sense of identity, right? This is mine, but I can't find it. Where did I put it? And you can't retrace your steps.
No.
So that
And
is
no
a
matter
huge
how
barrier
much
for
you
someone with visual
try.
perception deficiency.
Yeah. I for me I'm sitting here shaking my head and just in my mind like, "Oh my goodness. This is my life."
Hmm.
Because I struggle with all of these same things. I can organize myself and buy as many boxes and organizational tools and I still can't find it. And and then I get like you said, completely dysregulated, overwhelmed with how messy things are getting and then literally just shut down because it's
Yeah.
just too much.
I'm
Ah,
gonna I'm gonna give just a couple more about visual perception deficiency. And the
please.
reason
Yeah.
why is because a lot of people talk about autism, a lot of people talk about ADHD, but visual perception deficiency impacts both. So
Mhm.
another example with visual perception deficiency is like losing your place. So if you're trying to read, if you're trying to process through a big piece of information, if you have to continue to like, okay, where was I, and find your place, that is very common for someone who
Mm.
struggles with visual perceptual differences. Someone who might write letters backwards or creatively, because I like, once again, you said I was affirming, so let me do that. You
Yes.
more creative with how you articulate what you know. That
Yes.
might look like somebody writing letters backwards, but it also might mean you mix cursive in regular script writing.
Mm.
It could look like a lot of those different things for someone who has visual perceptual differences, because they have access to the one that seems more novel in their brain, and so they might present it as how it comes up versus how it's expected.
Yeah.
And also someone who finds it hard to judge distances. So I was
Mm.
a pretty good athlete, but I also had a
Okay.
lot of injuries, and it was hard for me to judge distances. I mean, I tore up my shin and my ankles and my heel and all this stuff playing sports. So catching a ball, throwing a ball, knowing when to stop and start, being able to have sort of the interoception, the internal sense of knowing how
Mm.
to use your body in space and time is going to be really something that you will want to pay attention to. If distances are hard, and this could also present for folks when driving, like knowing, like not rolling past or over the crosswalk, like those are things that might be in the room for someone with visual perceptual differences. This is
Mm,
not like you ignoring rules. This is your brain not processing them in time for you to respond to them.
I see. And what are some strategies that you've put in place to address that?
Cool. That's a great question, Joy. Some of the things that have worked for me are reminders. The
Mm.
Pomodoro method works for some folks. I don't use it all the time, but I use it when I have big tasks, big
Tell me
things
about
to
that. Tell me about that method.
yeah, so like you might work for 20 minutes or 25 minutes, and then you take like maybe a 5 or 10 minute break intentionally. So this isn't
Mm,
you holding your breath until you work again. This is you giving your brain a break from the task. And then when that break is over, going right back into it. So you're structuring and scaffolding the work, opting kind of, you're titrating in and out of the work and rest cycles. So you're
mm,
giving your brain action and then inaction, action and then inaction. So those that kind of method helps as far as like a timer, using visual alarms versus just sound can be helpful, because if you use a visual reminder, you can see if you have half left, a quarter left, just a smidge left.
mm.
That seems to be helpful. The
Okay.
visual timers are really, really helpful for folks with ADHD to keep you on task, but also breaking those tasks into steps. So
Okay.
instead of just saying clean your room by Friday, you might say like pick up toys, spend 10 minutes making your bed, and you get it done before the 10 minutes. That is an incentive.
Mm,
You might also use interest as motivation. So if you have some things that you love to learn, you might want to say, hey, do these 5 difficult things, and then you can watch a YouTube video or do 10 minutes of TikTok, right? So
yeah.
using interest as motivation is something that is very effective for folks that have ADHD and visual perception deficiency to help
Mm.
ground
And something that you
mood.
can do for yourself, but also if you are a parent or a loved one or a teacher of someone who is navigating neurodivergence, these are things that you can help them kind of explore and navigate as
Yeah.
well. So, I
Yep.
mean, these are just something that you just said now. I'm leaving for a trip this Friday, and I have a ton of packing to do. And I told myself I'm going to get packed today, and I was so overwhelmed that it literally made me. I just fell asleep. So, but if I had said pack all of your bathing suits, pack all of your
Toiletries and medicine.
trousers,
You know,
yeah,
focus on
that
the
would
what
have been
toiletries and
easier.
medicines. Do you have what you'll need? Think about the week
Mhm.
and the days. What do you take in the morning? What do you take once a day? What do you take? What are the vitamins? So get all
Yes.
the toiletries and stuff back. Like, that is a great way of sort of isolating and focusing on that one thing.
Mhm.
That's a great point.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
I'll
All
also
these
say
gems
quiet.
already.
I'll also say like quiet workspaces really do help.
Mm,
With distractibility being in the room, it can be difficult having ADHD and getting something accomplished, even with a timer, a visual timer, if you
mm.
don't have a quiet workspace where you can reground yourself. Because anything else can hijack your attention.
Yes,
Your
anything.
brain, the beauty of ADHD is your brain is processed to handle so many different things. Your mitt is so big. The issue is whatever gets stuck on it or in it.
Yes.
And so just being quiet workspaces help to with the regulation process. When I was in the corporate world, so I worked, I sold cars before.
Wow. Okay.
I used to work for Bank of America
Mm,
before. And so like in a corporate setting, do not, if you're neurodivergent, don't underutilize your breaks. So like federal mandates are like the 2 15-minute breaks for every 4 hours you work. Move,
mm,
provide movement, and in an accessible way for yourself. So if that means just having a quiet break, or if that means you being able to take a walk outside of your workspace,
mm.
or do something that is not work related outside of your workspace, is going to be really, really important to regulate, because there's so many different things that you're paying attention to, so many things that could distract you and hijack. So if you're able to, like, especially if you're in the corporate setting, to be able to use breaks to regulate use breaks for movement. If you're experiencing like overwhelm, use those to like for mindfulness, breath, because that's what actually helps with the vagus nerve and puts you
Yeah.
in a state for rest, digest, and learning.
So
And
what
I
do we
mean,
say for people? Because sometimes, and I don't know if this is a common thing, but sometimes for me, I don't recognize overwhelm. I might think that it's something else, and then in retrospect, I might go back and say, Joy, you were a little bit overwhelmed or a lot overwhelmed. So what are some from your clinical background? What might be some indications that you're overwhelmed? Because I know for me, I spend a lot of my life overwhelmed. And I think that's why I'm just in a constant state sometimes of overwhelmed. So I don't even notice it when I am, or I can't identify it. So what are some ways that overwhelm can present? If that's even a
the,
question.
that is a great question.
Mm.
The first thing I would say about someone who doesn't even recognize overwhelm is do you think you're high functioning? Does this feel like a normal baseline for you? That's a question I'd ask.
Mm. Yes and no.
Hmm.
Yes and no. I definitely kind of go. I know that I've not been diagnosed as ADHD. Um, I'm 99% sure I have ADHD. And then just part of my dyslexia is that I always look at the whole, like the big picture, and that can be overwhelming as well. And
Okay.
I look at things as just a big, just my neurodivergent brain, period. I look
Yeah,
at things
drinking from a
very
fire
differently.
hose. It's like all this is
Yes.
happening,
Yes.
all this is coming, and I have to kind of take it.
Yes.
One of the things
And
that can
I
be
get
helpful in that
overwhelmed.
one of the things that can help with that is social scripts and practice.
Mm.
So if you know that you're going to have something to do, role playing, visualizing yourself in that. What does it smell like? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What's the temperature? What do you notice around you when you're
Mm.
visualizing to help you understand your own body cues and responses to that thing? So
Mm.
visualizing can be very, very helpful. Using social scripts, like what will you say in this situation? Being able to have clear and direct language is very, very important to help mitigate overwhelm,
Mm.
especially before the onset, like before you even know it might happen.
Absolutely. I will try that and and let you know. Because I think that my default really is, and I know other people who struggle with this as well. My default is to either be, if I'm not going 100% and getting everything done, then I'm
Mhm.
literally paralyzed and can get nothing done.
Mhm. Mhm.
There's no real in between. I'm either extremely effective, or I'm just sitting there and I literally have to scroll or watch TV or go to sleep.
Yeah.
There's really not a in between. And then you then deal with the struggles or the shame or the guilt of, I had so much to do and I fell asleep or I got nothing done.
That's
So
why we
it's
want
just
to
a
create the
cycle.
routines, and that's why you want to break it down so you
Yeah.
can have those little micro moments of success that encourage you and motivate you and allow you to see the sort of the breadcrumbs, the track record of accomplishment,
Mm.
as opposed to the lens of overwhelm, which is like all the things you didn't do. If you're constantly allowing yourself to take sips from that fire
Mm.
hose, then you actually won't be quite as thirsty than if you're like, I gotta drink, I didn't drink.
Yes.
That's not,
Yes.
you can't even process it that way, right?
Yeah. It's so
Sips.
true.
Sips are gentle, sips are kind, sips are affirming. And that's something I'd invite a lot of neurodiverse people to. You don't have to respond in the moment. Your brain processes differently.
Mm.
Sometimes you have to say you need a moment. Sometimes you might have to say, can you repeat that?
Yes.
Those are
And for
ways to help
me,
mitigate overwhelm.
yeah. And I guess for me, like as a consultant, so I'm an educational
Hmm.
consultant, I spend a lot of time by myself. I honestly prefer to be by myself, but I can overwhelm myself completely in my house by myself, having not interacted with anyone, and can be completely overwhelmed. And so I like that notion of taking those small sips, taking things in increments, doing it in steps, and setting schedules for myself, celebrating those small little wins, for me would feel so much more rewarding than having to get to the end and celebrate it in the end, because honestly, sometimes I might not get to the end.
We could go
So
really deep on that. Like, what is the end for a neurodivergent person?
exactly.
Is it ever done? I don't know. It always buffers at like 98%.
Everyone, I don't know if everyone understands that. I was talking to a friend who's neurodivergent, and we were just saying things, and she's like, wait, everyone doesn't do that? And I'm like, no. I'm just finding these things in my mind, like our minds really do just work a little bit differently. Can we
Yeah,
shift a little bit
sure.
to, and thank you so much for all of those tips. I mean, we are what, 30 minutes in, and I feel like I have taken some things from you that will literally change the way that I approach my day-to-day my day-to-day life. But I'd love to talk a bit more about your how your neurodivergence and your just your neurodivergence, your the different challenges that I'm not even gonna say challenges, the different things that you're navigating. How has that shaped your approach to therapy and advocacy? Because I can already tell just the gems that you're getting me on how I can navigate things. I almost feel like I'm in a session with you and you're giving me I really do.
Trust
So
me,
how has that
I'm in session with myself 24/7.
but how has it shaped your approach to therapy and advocacy?
Yeah, how has it changed my approach, my
Or just
neurodivergent?
shaped it? How
How
has
has
it
it
shaped the way
impacted?
you approach things? Yeah.
I obviously think I'm more inclusive, more aware, more
Mm,
sensitive. I would even say more tolerant, right? There can be a stringent nature when you're in a clinical setting. Like, this needs to happen. This is what we're looking for. And my approach is, where is the pain? What's the struggle? What's the barrier? And I ask those questions.
mm,
So, one of the things for me in practice that I've worked with is like follow up can be difficult.
yes.
And being on, I was recently on a parental leave. And so I'm going back to work in 2 days. And
Wow.
so one of the things that I did a few days ago was like reach out to like the folks that I serve and saying like, hey, take a look at your calendar. Are there any changes that you need? That allowed me a whole week to
Mm,
mitigate any kind of surprises
yeah.
that would kind of incite some overwhelm for me. So like, hey, check your payment method, check your calendar. Like, do you still want to meet these times? Do you have any needs? It allows
Mm.
me to like manage those pieces by circling back and asking folks for what they need. And I think that those small check-ins allows me to do the sipping from the water fountain versus trying to drink from a fire hose when I just start working again and it's all coming for me all different directions.
Yeah, and advocating for yourself by doing that. Because,
Mhm.
I mean, to the listeners, you just welcomed a new baby into the mix. So I can imagine that is, I mean, completely joy filled, but also a lot
Oh
to
yeah, we
navigate.
can't
And
we
then,
can't talk about newborns without talking about the sleep deprivation of the caregivers. So
no, no. And then managing
Mhm.
that, and then an older child as well, who's really having their life turned upside down. And so in
Yeah,
your life, I mean, I can't tell you how many people have said going from one child to two is the hardest thing that they've ever done in their lives. So just navigating that and then trying to figure out uh, how does this look for my work life?
mhm.
It seems like the steps that you're putting in place is definitely advocating for your clients, but also advocating for yourself and allowing you to navigate in a way that's really prioritizing self-care and what's going to work best for
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
Also embracing like pause and silence. There is an aversion to silence because, especially in a Western context, we are supposed
Mm.
to have value in answers.
Yes.
We really harp on productivity and responsiveness. And in my practice, I really try to invite like space to put down the burdens. And so
Mm.
sometimes that means having a little bit more silence in the space, like while I think about my response. Because while my ADHD might really quickly, with all those different channels, like, oh, got something, being able to like acknowledge that I've got ideas without letting those ideas lead my response. So if there's something difficult that I'm dealing with, giving myself the time to even process it,
Mm,
giving my clients like the time to process some things, and sometimes they're like, is that okay? Is that all right? And I'm giving the space for them to for that to settle without having to be reactive, because there is a difference between being reactive and responding. And a lot of times with folks who are neurodivergent, they'll react and say, "You saw what you saw. That was my response." But
mm,
oftentimes that's not the response they desired. So
mm.
providing that gap, that space, that intentional space for your actual intention to land is very important for you to stay regulated, but also show up with like how you actually want to show up. Because with all the different channels that are going on in my brain, all the different thoughts and solutions that I have, with all the knowledge I have, not leading with the knowledge, but leading with like that empathy of like, yeah, you just shared something huge. Like, what do we do with this? And sometimes I have to treat myself the same way. What I do with all of these different things that are happening. Like right now,
Mm.
in this current climate, which we didn't name, is people who are neurodivergent, people who have neurodiverse experiences. What are you doing? How are you in a system that is very reticent against not holding your humanity? Right?
Yes.
We're here. We're here. It's not coming. We're here.
Oh no, we are
So,
absolutely.
what do you do with a system that is refusing or cannot hold the water of your humanity? And so being able to say like, okay, what do I do next? What do I need? Some folks never get to the place where they can actually see what their need is. And that is the most affirming thing anyone can do for someone who is neurodivergent. Provide enough space to sit with the need.
I was gonna ask you what was the defining moment that brought you into like working in this field? Because I mean, it's obvious that this is where you are absolutely meant to be. But I want to shift a little bit because
Sure.
I know that many neurodivergents and people in the queer community, they struggle with finding affirming mental health care. So, what do you think is the biggest gaps in the systems right now when it comes to our community, whether that
Mm.
be neurodivergent community, whether that be LGBTQIA plus community, or people who find themselves in both? What do you think might be some of the biggest gaps?
So I won't answer on behalf of the community. I
Yeah.
will share what I notice. And
Okay.
one of the biggest barriers is policy, specifically around insurance. Like someone could be trying to get care. So you can imagine someone who's neurodivergent, who's tried everything on their own independently, that they know their own lived experience and it hasn't helped enough. And so trying to engage in care and entrusting someone else to help lead or help support your process of like getting help, getting support, or having a new vantage point in life
Mm,
can be very difficult when you try to get help and then the claim is declined, or you're trying to get help and your copay used to be $10 and now all of a sudden um, the new year comes and now you've got to pay $290 for one session. That
yes.
cost is prohibitive, and it prevents people from being able to get the help that they want. And so it's not an interpersonal barrier. It's not a personality barrier. It's not a pathological barrier. The barrier is policy, because now this
Mm.
person is stuck with a bill instead of help.
Yeah. Yes. And then we're already talking about overwhelm or just the neurodivergent mind. We tend to spiral to kind of find all the things that could go wrong. And just adding that into the mix can be completely devastating to a lot of
Mhm.
people. And I
There's
can
also there's
imagine.
also I was going to interject to say that there's
Mm,
also an isolating experience that a lot of times there is an experience that people who have a lot of issues, a lot of struggle, a lot of differences think that they're the only ones, and so the advocacy can sometimes be lost on them. Like, yeah, I know it's just me, so like there may not really be a lot of resources for somebody like me,
mm,
and so their gumption, their persistence may be interrupted by a perception that solutions don't exist and that they're the only ones. It can be very
yes.
isolating. That's actually what led me to grad school, is like, this isn't the way I'm receiving help, the way I'm like Googling help, this isn't it. And so I had
Mm,
to like read literature reviews. I had to like look at different constructs. I had to
Yeah.
look at multicultural frameworks to be able to create my own way of providing care. And
Mm.
so it can be very isolating. And I think that that's one of the biggest things with neurodivergent people is they might feel like they're on an island on themselves. Like, yeah, but my thing is a little different. Well, I'm high functioning. So like, generally speaking, I'm okay. But like, if you are living with overwhelm as a baseline, is that okay?
Yes. And then also, I mean, one thing that I've noticed for myself, uh, I just wasn't understood for the vast majority of my growing up. So I wasn't diagnosed until I was 12. And then from there, I had diagnosis, but then not everyone accepted my diagnosis. So they say, well, she functions fine. That really couldn't be what's going on. So there was a lot. I really didn't feel like I settled into knowing exactly what was going on with me until probably 16, 17.
Mm.
And then really being able to advocate for myself. But for so long, I was so misunderstood. And then I also didn't know that what was going on in my brain wasn't happening in everyone else's, that I almost had to deal with everything by myself and internalize everything, and because and I couldn't really explain what was going on to people. And so my default as an adult is to really turn inward and try to solve everything on my own, which is catching up to me. It's catching up to me. And it's something that I know that I really need help process, like kind of processing and figuring out a solution for. But I also have noticed when I'm speaking to other neurodivergents that they do the same. Like we really do internalize. And so finding someone who is able to help us, and even in as my neurodiverse mind now, I'm like completely forget what what my point was in that whole thing, or what you said that triggered that. But just having someone who understands those struggles and kind of can help us outwardly express what's going on with us internally could be so incredibly helpful. And it seems like that is what you're able to do with a lot of
Yeah,
people. Yeah.
absolutely.
Which is so like it's just talking to you now, Dane. I'm like, oh my goodness, just all the little gems that you're giving, and just having someone who has some of the same. I'm not going to say struggles because I don't really think that that these things are struggles.
Navigates
It's
with
just the way.
differences.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's differences. It's just the way that we do. But it seems like as a therapist, you've really tailored your approach when working with neurodivergence. And I love to say that what works for us works for everyone. But what what have you done to tailor your approach? Um,
I update my language.
mm,
And so I don't think that there's quote unquote anything wrong with like saying neurodivergent.
mm-mm.
And we can obviously have a whole other podcast on like language and how that accessibility and language, but like being neurodiverse, it encapsulates biology and human difference a lot better.
Mm.
Neurodivergent almost sends a message that you're not where you're supposed to be. And
Yeah.
and so saying like neurodiverse is like we all operate differently. Nobody's the same. Even
No.
twins can have differences. And so like that's the fact. That's
Mm-hmm.
the reality. But we don't want to send the message that folks aren't where they're supposed to be when they are exactly where they are.
Yes. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? I was just looking at the as I'm looking at my question. So affirming mental health care keeps on standing up for me. What's the difference? So I feel like adding that one word affirming makes a big difference in what your approach might be when working with people. Or is there?
Yeah, I think somebody who is non-affirming might say, yes, you have ADHD, yes, you meet these qualifications, and you still should be paying attention. And we still need you to pass the standardized test. Someone who's affirming might say, like, ooh, they're not implementing the IEP in the classroom. Time
Mm,
out. Or
yes.
we're doing some really good therapy sessions where you're able to get through 10 questions, but your parents aren't making sure that the homework is in your backpack.
Mm, yeah.
You're not making sure that your report is saved. You didn't run the report and do a preview of your PowerPoint presentation before you presented it. Like, let's walk back to those pieces. Affirming means looking at what's actually happening, not expecting someone to be somewhere where they're not.
Yeah. It makes a huge difference when you look at it from that perspective. And really kind of goes back to prioritizing executive functioning skills and looking at your mental health and encompassing all of those things.
Right.
Yeah.
Diagnosis is something that has been helpful for a lot of people, but it can be a barrier too. What I'm starting to see is there is a hesitation for diagnosis because
Yes.
it can ultimately can impact life insurance. People don't talk about that. People do not talk about that.
I never
People
thought about
say,
that.
people say like, hey, you got this diagnosis, you got anxiety, you got multiple, you got this, depression, you have this diagnosis. Well, you have autism spectrum disorder. Well, guess what? That's a pre-existing condition.
Yes.
Cancel. That's what policy will do.
Yes.
And you won't have access to the things that are supposed to protect you.
Wow.
And so, even though diagnosis can be helpful when receiving services, absolutely, it can also be a prohibitive factor, which actually prevents you from actually having the safety net of some protections.
Yeah.
Too.
And just on a general, just so many, especially with neurodivergence, I feel that there's so many misconceptions that a lot of times people who are they don't want to be diagnosed. They don't want to have that label, especially with me working in the education field. I have parents all the time saying, I don't want to test my students, my child, because I don't want to know if they have autism or if they have ADHD, because then people are going to label them. And I feel like it's just because there's so many misconceptions about what it means, what these diagnoses mean. For me, like for instance, I'm dyslexic. I have Erland syndrome, and people assume that I was in special education. I was never in special education. I never had it. So it looks different for everyone. Everyone's journey is going to be different, and there's nothing wrong with people being in special education. I will advocate for that. If anything, I was getting special services because I was intelligent and I needed to accommodate. I'm twice exceptional. They needed to accommodate my where I was advanced versus where
It's
I
a
was
both
having some
and.
difficulties. Yeah, I was, and it's what made it very difficult to diagnose me, because I was kind of able to trick the assessment. And I knew what they were looking for, and so I was able to give them the answers, and had already put strategies, had to come up with strategies to survive to that point. And so I was able to say, okay, I think they're looking for this, and just fill in what I needed to fill in. So it's very difficult to diagnose me as a result, but it hindered me in a lot of ways because people didn't see me as needing help. And I think that because I was so good at masking, I was so good at like covering up any difficulties that I was having, that when it came down to it, and they tested me, they said that there's obviously something going on with her reading, but that everything else is off the charts. So she just must be lazy. And I had to deal with all of those labels and everything else, which has caused a ton of just trauma. I think as an adult, I'm having to deal with that. I was going to ask you about different strategies or tools or accommodations, but that you feel have been helpful. But I feel like you've already given us so many. But is there anything else that comes to mind when it comes to dealing with the ins and outs, or some of the things that we've been talking about during our discussion, that there might be some tools or approaches that you think might be helpful to listeners?
Yeah, I think that a strategy that can help folks of all walks of life is journaling.
Oh,
And
okay.
when journaling can help you track progress, journaling can also help you name your needs.
Mm.
But journaling doesn't have to be written. There can be
Tell me more about
audio
that.
journaling. Name your experience so that you can
Mm.
track what the triggers are, where the deficiencies are, where the differences are. You can do audio or audio journaling too. You can say, hey, when this happened, or I'm experiencing this level of this. You can just name the things through audio journaling, recording your experiences, capturing them, and cataloging them. So that
Mm.
way you can go back to either see progress or to see where the growth edges are, where you can see where your needs are. I think that that's affirming because it doesn't wait for someone to save you, but it also moves you in the direction towards change and support so that you can
Mm.
actually meet yourself where you are as opposed to where your brain is fixating where you're supposed to be or where your brain
How
is stuck.
I love that idea. How do you suggest kind of setting up a routine to make sure that you're consistent with those things? I know that I feel better when I journal. My friend bought me a gratitude journal and I was gung ho about it at first and loved it, and then I kind of fell off, and then I'll come back on. It's been kind of hard to get into a rhythm. Do you have any suggestions for how you can help people really incorporate that into their life? Because I do find it so beneficial.
The first question I would ask is to anybody listening is, do you have an idea of when your capacity is diminished?
Mm,
Do you have an idea of where and when your triggers happen?
yeah.
Do you know when your bandwidth is low?
For
Do
me,
you notice
midday around 2 o'clock. It's when I know I'm
so
going to start struggling.
around that time? What do you notice in your body and brain? What do you notice there?
I start making not excuses, but I'm very distractible. I get quite tired. I just kind of want to step away for a second. And then that step away
Mhm.
ends up being longer than I intended. And then it's difficult for me to get back on track for the rest of the day.
So we have not discussed neurodiversity and trauma.
Mm.
Um, and I'm totally open to kind of having a part two or following up with anybody who's curious. But there's a
Dane, you
book, The
can come
Body.
back. You can come back on the Joy of Neurodiversity anytime you want. Yes.
There's a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it mainly talks about trauma, but as it relates to neurodiversity, like I would be curious the part of you that, and I have like I decline a little bit around 2:30 too. Like I'm
Mm,
like I get through that like afternoon lunch, and I'm like, oh, okay, I still have 3 more hours.
yes.
So it's a little bit of a trudge. Something that really helps with that is knowing where you are in the day and being able to support yourself. So going back to like taking that intentional move break, getting yourself
Mm,
outside of that. So that way that last little stint is more like a sprint.
yeah.
That last little stint does not have to feel like a marathon, but you won't experience it like that if you don't give yourself the concession, the accommodation, or the break.
And when you say move, because my mind is like, go for a walk, Joy, walk for an hour. And that causes the other like another issue. And I don't always have that time. Even though it's one of the things I love to do and it really settles me. But when you say move, what are some suggestions of what moving looks like to kind of give your brain that pause?
You can squat, you
Mm,
can laugh, you can try maybe two or like like a 10-minute YouTube video of like 3 different breathing techniques. So there's like box breathing, there's diaphragmic breathing,
mm,
there's also some Eastern techniques, more substantiated techniques of breath work that activate the parasympathetic can be very helpful. So if you just like have 10 minutes of a break and you can also move through breathing, that can
mm.
also help because it's like a reset. Like, have you ever had to like hard reset your phone? It's a
Yes.
hard reset to your system. And
Okay.
so being able to do those things in the afternoon, giving yourself those choices. Think of it like a menu.
Mm,
Think of it like happy hour for your
yeah.
self-care. Have a menu. Neurodivergent folks, neurodiverse folks, folks who are wired differently and folks can't hold it and notice it, create a self-care menu, something to choose from.
I love this
So
idea.
sometimes you could do for a walk, but what are you going to do if it's raining or if you don't feel like it?
Yeah. Well,
You
I
still have
live
to
in
do
Dubai, so
something.
there's not a lot of rain, but I get what you're saying.
If it's too hot, if there's like some sort of reason why you can't go outside, what are the other
Yeah.
things that you can do? Even if it's just the fact that you don't really want to go outside right now. I don't always go outside, but sometimes I do. Like I'll
Mm,
walk the dog, but then sometimes I'll do some squats, push up, planks. Sometimes I'll watch like 2 or 3 funny videos to
mm,
activate my parasympathetic system, and I'm laughing and I'm engaged. It's enjoyable, and that can bring my brain back in online where I'm not like solving a problem, working hard. It can bring back my humanity, and that's really important to a highly sensitive neurodivergent person with autism. visual perception deficiency, where the
Mm.
overwhelm is almost always on medium.
Yes.
It's always like a slow burn of overwhelm. And so something that helps me is humor and laughter. But
Mm.
that's me. And so I move toward those things to help reset my brain and body to continue navigating through a life that doesn't necessarily is not structured for our humanity and makeup.
Yeah, self-care menus need to be
Can you
normalized.
have appetizers, have an entree if you need something a little bit heavy, something to stick to the ribs, something to really get you through maybe the weekend? Think about the level, the intensity, and the substantial quality of some of those things that might be on your menu. Some people might draw.
Yeah.
Some
I
people might
got
do a
a
Sudoku puzzle.
painting. My one of my clients gave me she knew that I was going to be here and away from family during Christmas, and she's like, I can see how that might be difficult. And so I gave you an activity. So she bought me this paint by number set.
Yeah,
And I was like, this is the best thing ever. But I love the idea of, because so going back to the appetizer, main course, maybe dessert type situation, sometimes I need like a more substantial break.
there you go.
Sometimes I just need to have just a little pause. So having that menu where I can say, and sometimes I'll forget some of the things that I like that might be very helpful to me.
That's
So,
not uncommon. That's not uncommon.
yes.
I want folks to hear that. Sometimes you might not remember or have access to what works for you.
Yeah, I sometimes I forget, or I'll remind myself like, oh, I really did enjoy doing that activity. Why don't I try that again? And that made me feel really centered. Why haven't I been doing that? Because you just get stuck in your own, stuck in your way, literally stuck in your own in your own way.
Yep.
So, oh, self care menus.
Hmm.
Listen, Dane, you might be on to something. We
Yeah.
might need to make our make ourselves some self-care menu and make them available to people so they can
This
help.
is like where we get like some of the ways I show up for myself, but also things that work as a parent too, right? You gotta give some options.
Yeah. Do you have a quick little breathing technique that you use sometimes, that if someone's just, sometimes I feel it breathing like building up, and I'll
Mhm.
just like slowly do some breaths or whatever, but I don't know if I'm doing it correctly. Do you have like a quick little breathing technique that you feel works when you feel it
I'll give
coming?
you all like my observational hack, so to speak, around breath work, and that is making sure that your out breath is way longer than your in breath.
Okay.
That is a good starting place for somebody who's never done breath work.
So
You'll
breathing
get
in for 5 maybe and releasing for 10.
mm-hmm. And
Okay.
you start to get to the master's level things when you like add a hold in there or do it for a different amount of time.
Okay.
So um an example could be breathing in for 6, a count of 6, like,
Mhm.
and letting out for a count of 12.
I ran out.
And that is perfect.
I
So
ran out, but it did make
that
me
is how you hit the gym.
mm.
Because when you're running out, you are slowly, literally, you're massaging and stretching out your organ's capacity to hold and
Mm.
process stress. You are also metabolizing the stress so that way the stress or whatever you're trying to like regulate from doesn't automatically send strong signals to your brain to react to what you're trying to manage through your breath work. So you're doing several different things with the breath work, and you're helping to temper what is being sent to your brain and
Mm.
how much your brain has to process around stress, mitigating stress. I'm going to do it again because
Okay.
usually once is never enough. I would suggest at least 3 to 6 rounds. And
Okay.
so you could start very small, like 3 and 6. I obviously am doing it because I've been doing this for a long time, so I know what I need. But if
Yeah.
you were just starting out, you can even do it in breath through 3, but you just drink the air. Like,
Okay. So this time when you do it, count it out for people that might be listening and not seeing us
okay,
on the YouTube
okay,
channel. Yeah.
that's a great tip. So we're
Okay.
gonna go in 1, 2, 3, and hold. And we're going to go out for 6. Out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Let's do one more. That felt good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So we're just going to do in 3. We're going to hold for 2, and we're going to do out for 6. So
Okay.
in for 3, 1, 2, 3. Holding for 1, 2. Just noticing your breath is there and letting it out for 6 slowly, like you're putting down a baby to go to sleep. Right. 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. Now the baby's laying down.
Absolutely.
You gotta be
And
gentle with yourself.
mm,
You gotta be
I,
gentle with yourself. Some people
it,
breathe like they're trying to correct themselves. And even when you're driving,
did
picture
you see me
somebody who
holding?
overcorrects. Picture somebody who overcorrects their car during rain. You got
Yes.
hydro. So
Yes.
don't overcorrect, right? Be really gentle. Small movements, small motions make a really big difference. And your body knows, your body notices. If anybody really wants to create like a self-care menu for themselves and wants to like implement strategies, I'm totally open to helping and supporting that process. If you can't find help elsewhere, I'm also open to helping people find resources, because I don't know, we're an international podcast, and so
Yeah.
depending on where you are in the world, I definitely am one resource to help you, point you in the right direction. But these strategies can really help you on a day to day. The reason why I like breath work is, one, because it's accessible, it's ancestral, and it's affordable.
It costs you nothing.
It costs you nothing. And you could be on the train, you could be driving, you could be in a meeting before or after, and like it is accessible to you. Right. And so you can do these things to make sure that you are still in the room. Because the one thing I don't want to happen for our neurodiverse folks who are extremely talented is for you to be fully in the room.
Yeah,
Imagine maybe a
absolutely.
quarter of you
Mm.
isolated in a room showing up. No, I want the whole you in high definition being in the room,
I love
being
this.
able to be in the room.
When you said, and you said it's free, it's ancestral. What do you mean by ancestral?
Well, if you look at like some like, for instance, in the schools of yoga or some kind of Eastern Indian techniques, breath work is used in some of the practices. And so these things have been used for years. If you look at some dancing and some African traditions, their breath work is very important. Breath work is important for being in spiritual, but is also very important in mental health. It is important for communication. It is one of the first things people measure in life is breath. And
Yeah.
so we can't lose sight of having access to breath that helps to heal us. We can't lose sight of
I, I'm just writing down notes and, and
that.
all these things. I'm like, Date is just is just full of so much wisdom. I'm just enjoying every moment. I wanted to. We're getting to the point where we need to wrap things up, but I still have a few more questions for you, if
Yeah,
you don't, if
absolutely.
you don't mind. Can we talk a little bit about the work that you're doing with your company? I really want to highlight that because I know that you're doing amazingly impactful work and that you've founded DNA Consulting Services to address systemic issues in mental health and public health. And you talked about some of them, but can you
Right.
tell me about the work that you're doing and what is some of the impact that you're having and through the work that you're doing?
Wow. So over the past 10 years, I have done competency trainings. And so cultural competency is like an old adage. I think the terminology that I use now is cultural humility. So I've
Mm.
trained companies, hospital systems, schools, universities. So we're talking about K through 12, but also universities on DEI. So it's
Okay.
comical, but almost in a Shakespearean sense. Like comedies weren't actually funny, but they were like zany and like really wild. So
Mm.
I think it's comical that I like my the foundation of my firm is DEI, because we really show people where they can grow and how they can do things more sustainably and holistically. That's what it
Yes.
is. So if we were to accept that word, that's really the end. Is the end goal is to wellness. The end goal is for sustainability. And so I look at what isn't working, what isn't functional. I'm able
Mm.
to provide solutions and practices to be able to kind of mitigate wherever the disconnect, whatever the barriers are, wherever the contention is.
The work is so important. And I know, I mean, not to get political, but there is a lot that's going on with DEI right now, especially in the States.
Yeah, there is. And I'm
And
not stopping, just so you know.
no,
Policy can do what policy does, and
yes,
it's still needed. Right? What, like, we're having this conversation amidst. So obviously there's still some relevance.
yes, there's total relevance and it's not going to go away. We can't ignore it no matter what people try to do with policies or
Yeah.
blocking access or anything else. It's needed because we're still here.
Right.
So, if you're going to look at educators, parents, allies that are listening in right now, what are some things that can be done today to make spaces more inclusive for the neurodivergent mind?
Hmm. So if everyone Googles the term civic engagement, and if you can't Google that term, try to reach out to Joy and get access to one of us, either me or Joy. And civic engagement is, I think, where we'd start. So the way I'm shifting on some of my business uh, in the way of community engagement is I'm doing some community journalism. Uh,
Mm,
and so that aspect of civic engagement, being able to tell the stories, not just about strife and about pain points, but also about what resources are existing, what agencies and CBOs, community-based organizations, do exist, and what do they need in order to continue
mm,
to thrive to provide the services. Um, so journalism helps to centralize those voices, which is like one of the reasons why I said, with the privilege, the experience that I have, like, I'm really trying to like carry voices with me, even though my experience is important. And I'm glad that I have a chance to share parts of my story. It really is about the experiences of the collective, because that's what moves the needle on policy. So I think civic engagement can be very important. A lot
yeah.
of folks underestimate their engagement in their municipalities where they live. Um,
Mm,
Being able to have businesses and organizations meet the needs of the people that they serve, that sense of accountability is very important. Another thing that I'm doing is some education advocacy here in DC, and especially in Ward 7 and 8.
okay.
There is an agency called Elect Ed DC. And so, what Elect Ed DC is, it creates the platform for some of the lawmakers, some of the policymakers, some of the council members, and it gives them their agenda. It gives them what to focus on. So, it
Mm,
is the parents, the practitioners who are saying, these are your talking points. Make sure you stick to the script. And that is very different from somebody writing your life for you.
yeah,
And so those are the ways that my company is shifting, is putting more focus around civic engagement, and I think that that's where we need to be, so that we're not ignored, we're not invisible, but we will
absolutely.
persist to exist. That's sort of my adage right now, is we're going to
Mm,
persist to exist.
because we should be here in all
Yeah,
spaces.
well, we are. So
Absolutely. We
what are
are
you going to
here.
do about it? It's not
Yeah.
like, what are we going to do about this DEI going away? No, what are you going to do about us still being here?
Yes, we're not going anywhere. I totally agree. Thank you so much. Okay, so if I'm going to wrap up some of the things that we touched on, and we touched on so many, I feel like I should have taken more notes as we were talking. But the things that are really coming out for me that are sticking out is that really take that time for pause to
Hmm.
really notice like what overwhelm feels like for you, and then figure out what you can do. And it seems like for me, overwhelm seems, I mean, it's ever present for me. But just in this hour that we've been talking, you've given me some great things that I can look at to help with that overwhelm. So whether that be the self-care menu, or figuring out how you're going to journal, whether that be writing or auditory journaling, or what was it you said, one other type of journaling?
Oh, I said audio. Yeah, audio journal.
Audio.
So you could
Yeah.
just record your voice
Mm.
if you cannot write, once, like you said, some people may have dysgraphia, they might not be able to capture. So yeah, even audio helps to
Yeah.
timestamp your experience and help
Mm.
measure change in a qualitative way.
Amazing. Breath work is something
Mm-hmm.
that we can do to just give yourself that That's what I heard you saying again and again. Give yourself a moment of pause. And you can do that in so many ways. One other thing that I wanted to highlight from today's episode is just taking those times to break life into small little steps, which to me is a bit of a pause as well. So it's not so overwhelming. I'm taking that away from me.
Mm-hmm.
And get involved and advocate for what we need in our communities, regardless of where you are in the world, and be unapologetically who you are in your neurodivergence. It's kind of what I took away from from this conversation,
Absolutely.
with much more, but just to sum things up, because I could go on for forever with what I said. But coming to the end of our episode, there is one question that I always love to ask my guests on the Joy of Neurodiversity. I just want to know, what joy has neurodiversity brought into your life?
Wow. Um, I think I feel a sense of humility because in my 40 plus years of existence, I've never had a platform like this.
Mm,
So it is, I'm sitting with emotion and appreciation. I'm sitting with gratitude and excitement of the fact that I'm not the only one. That is
yeah.
not the experience I'm having today, even though I've
Mhm.
had to like get a lot of the answers I've shared by myself on my own, with my own energy, stress, and struggle. That having this platform is a gift
Thank you.
on such an elevated plane to where we are no longer isolated, but we can
Mm,
now share, collaborate, and join together. That even if someone is not able to understand the nuance of how you're wired, that
yeah.
is not an indicator of your value.
Oh,
Someone might look at all your wires and say, I don't know what to do with this, but that doesn't mean that you don't work. That doesn't mean that you're not valuable. And I think that that is the greatest gift that this podcast has given me.
oh, thank you so much. And I'm happy that I'm able to kind of be a part of that, because but what you said is so true. Just because someone doesn't understand my wiring doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with it. Like, that is such a powerful statement. Oh,
Yeah,
thank you for that.
the only person that could tell if something's wrong is you.
Exactly.
We have to trust that as neurodiverse people, that's not what society tells us.
Absolutely. And I feel that so often it can be hardwired in us, that because society doesn't always understand us, because we don't always fix and fit into a box, that there is something wrong with us. And I reject that. I reject that wholeheartedly. And I hope that everyone listening here will do the same. So, well,
Absolutely.
Dane, I cannot thank you enough for sharing your wisdom, sharing your experiences, sharing so many techniques. I did not I mean, I've spoken to you. I knew that you were going to come with some amazing gems, but I feel like this has been a jam-packed episode of things that we can do just to be peaceful and combat all the things that go on in our heads as neurodivergents. I cannot thank you enough. Where can listeners find you, support your work, or better yet, come and find you as a client? Because I feel like I need to get my appointment ready. Can you work with people outside of the DC metro area? Just tell us where we can
Yeah.
find you,
Yeah.
who can access you, and I'll make sure that I drop all that into the show notes as well.
So, as far as actual official clinical therapy,
Mm-hmm.
I'll be focused on the folks in the DMV. And so, if other folks want supports and services, I do consulting, and folks can reach out to me. Um, barriers that people typically experience are like technology and finances. And so if technology and finance is a barrier, I'd love to hear a way that I can try to reach you. And I can definitely support through consulting and coaching for folks who I cannot have on my caseload.
Okay.
But yeah, even just feedback, even if you don't need a service, like I would love feedback from the listeners. I want to hear what you're walking away with. And the ways that you can find me, just DNA Consulting. So that's the letter D, the ampersand sign, and then the letter A, DNA Consulting Services. If you Google it, if you write it down, that's where you can find me.
Perfect. And we will drop it into the show notes as well. I cannot thank you enough. And thank you to all the listeners for joining in today. I truly hope you took as much away from this episode as I did. And if you want to hear more amazing episodes and learn about stories from different neurodiverse life, then please subscribe so that you're notified when our newest episode comes out. Have an amazing day. Thank you for listening to the Joy of Neurodiversity. See you in the next episode. And that's a wrap for this episode of the Joy of Neurodiversity. I hope today's conversation left you feeling inspired, empowered, and seen. Remember, neurodiversity isn't something to fix, it's something to celebrate. If you loved this episode, don't forget to follow, subscribe, and leave a review. It truly helps more people find this space of understanding and joy. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. And let's keep the conversation going. Connect with me on Instagram at Joy of Neurodiversity and LinkedIn at Joy Buckner. And share your thoughts using the hashtag The Joy of Neurodiversity. New episodes drop every Thursday, so be sure to hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next dose of neurospicy brilliance, deep dives, and empowering conversations. Until next time, embrace who you are, celebrate how you think, and keep rewriting the narrative because the world needs your brilliance. Think big, be bold, and never dim your neurodivergent spark because we were never meant to fit in.